At 1 in the morning, my 8-year-old granddaughter slipped me a tablet while my daughter lay unconscious in the ICU. Mom said only Grandpa can see this. I pressed play. Seconds later, I knew her fall was no accident. What appeared on that screen dragged me back into a world I had buried after 26 years undercover. My son-in-law and his powerful senator father had no idea who I really was or the trap I was about to build. When the reckoning came, my son-in-law woke beneath his own oak tree, zip-tied and terrified. Beside him was a note, "You touched the wrong family." If this story already has you hooked, I am grateful you are here. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where you watching from, city, state, country, I want to know. Welcome to Revenge Dad, where justice always finds a way. This story contains fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or places is coincidental, but everything this story teaches you is worth keeping. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept the mug on the table anyway. Old habit, something to hold on to while I worked through the stack of insurance files that never seemed to get any shorter, no matter how many evenings I gave them. My name is Raymond Calloway. I am 58 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Queens, New York, and I drive a 2012 Honda Accord that needs new brake pads. My neighbors think I am a quiet man who works in risk assessment for a mid-size insurance firm in Midtown. Mrs. Petrakis next door once told her daughter I was the most boring man on the block, and she meant it as a compliment. She was not wrong exactly. She just did not have all the information. For 26 years, between the ages of 29 and 55, I worked as an undercover detective for the New York Police Department. I spent those years inside organizations that did not exist on paper networks that moved money across borders, that disappeared people when it was convenient, that operated in the space between what the law could see and what it could not. I wore different names the way other men wear different ties. I built lives inside other lives and walked away from them when the work was done, or when it was not done and could not be finished, which happened more than I ever told anyone. I retired early, 11 months before my full pension milestone. People in the department thought it was burnout. It was not burnout. It was a calculation. My daughter Claire had just turned 29, and she was living in Los Angeles, and I had spent too many years being unreachable. I wanted to be 14 minutes away when she needed me, not 14 hours, so I became the most boring man on the block. And for 3 years, it had been enough. The phone rang at 9:47 on a Friday night in September. The screen read, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, area code 310, Los Angeles. I had received bad news before. In 26 years of undercover work, I had been on the receiving end of calls that changed everything. Calls that told me an operation had collapsed, that a contact had been burned, that someone I had worked alongside for 8 months was not who I thought they were. I knew what it felt like to hear a voice on the other end of a line and understand in the first half second that the world had just shifted. This was worse than all of them. "Mr. Calloway," the voice said, a woman calm professional, the voice of someone who made these calls every night. "This is Dr. Sandra Okafor calling from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. I am calling regarding your daughter Claire Vance. She has been brought in following an injury and is currently in emergency surgery. Sir, I need you to listen carefully. The situation is serious." My right hand gripped the edge of the kitchen table so hard my knuckles went white, but my voice came out steady. 26 years of training does not disappear overnight. "What kind of injury?" I asked. "A traumatic head injury, Mr. Calloway. She is in surgery right now. I cannot give you more details over the phone, but I strongly urge you to come to Los Angeles as soon as possible." I asked 2 more questions. I wrote down nothing because I did not need to. Then I thanked Dr. Okafor and ended the call. For exactly 4 seconds, I stood in my kitchen, holding a phone that had gone dark and feeling my heart hammering so hard against my ribs, I could hear it. My eyes burned. My throat tightened until swallowing felt like pushing a stone down. Claire, my daughter. 26 years I had kept her safe by staying invisible, by being the boring man in Queens, by making sure that none of the people I had put behind bars ever connected Raymond Calloway, the insurance consultant to Raymond Calloway, the man who had helped dismantle 4 of their networks. And now she was on a table in Los Angeles, and I was standing in my kitchen, and I was not there. I put the phone in my pocket, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, and walked out. I did not check whether I had locked up. I did not go back. In the car on the way to JFK, I called Nora Claire's mother, my ex-wife of 11 years. a woman who had earned the right to know everything before I did. She picked up on the second ring. Raymond, it's almost 10 o'clock. Nora. My voice came out rough, cracked at the edges in a way I had not planned. I need you to listen to me. Claire is at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. She's in surgery, head injury. I don't know everything yet. The sound Nora made on the other end of the line was one I had never heard from her before, not in 14 years of marriage and 11 years after it. A sharp intake of breath and then a sob that she tried to swallow and could not, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep it cannot be managed or contained, raw and broken and terrified all at once. "Oh God," she choked out. "Oh God, Raymond." "Get on a flight," I told her, and my voice was steadier than I had any right to it, being steadier than she felt, because the truth was that my hands were trembling on the steering wheel, and I was driving 90 miles an hour on the Van Wyck Expressway, and my vision had gone slightly blurred in a way that had nothing to do with the road. "Get on the first flight you can. I'll be there before you. I'll call you when I land." "Is she going to be okay?" Nora asked, and her voice broke completely on the last word, dissolving into something small and frightened that squeezed the air right out of my chest. "I don't know yet," I said. "I don't know." I could not lie to her, not about this. I made it to JFK in 31 minutes. I bought the last seat on an 11:15 flight to LAX, a middle seat between a man who fell asleep before takeoff and a teenager with headphones. I sat there for 5 hours and 20 minutes, and I did not sleep, and I did not eat the snack the flight attendant offered, and I stared at the seat back in front of me while the plane crossed the dark country from one coast to the other. I had spent 26 years walking into rooms where I did not know what was waiting for me. Rooms in Rotterdam and Chicago, in a warehouse outside of Baltimore where 3 men who wanted to kill me were convinced I was someone else entirely. I had never been afraid of the rooms. You learn after long enough to leave your fear somewhere outside the door and come back for it later. But sitting on that plane at 35,000 feet over the middle of America, all I could think was that I had never walked into a room where my daughter was the one lying on the table, and I did not know how to leave my fear outside that door. I did not know if there was a version of me that could do that. I pressed 2 fingers hard against my eyes until the burning stopped. Then I put my hands flat on my thighs and kept them there, and I breathed and I waited for the plane to land. The emergency room entrance at Cedars-Sinai smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and the fluorescent lights above the waiting area had the particular quality of light that exists only in hospitals, bright enough to see everything, cold enough to drain the color out of it. I had walked through the doors at 12:37 in the morning, still in the clothes I had been wearing, when the phone rang in Queens, my carry-on bag over one shoulder, and 3 hours of failed sleep sitting behind my eyes like broken glass. I saw Ethan before he saw me. He was standing near the far end of the waiting room, with a man I did not recognize, at first tall, silver-haired, the kind of posture that comes from decades of people making room for you when you walk into a space. The man had his hand on Ethan's shoulder and was speaking to him in a low voice, the way people speak when they want to look like they are comforting someone without actually losing composure themselves. On the flight over, I had looked up Senator Douglas Vance of California, 22 years in the state Senate, 3 committee chairmanships, a photograph on his official website that showed a man who had learned to smile in a way that reached his eyes just enough to seem genuine. The man standing next to my son-in-law was the same man from that photograph, except older and less practiced at keeping the calculation off his face. Ethan turned and saw me. He crossed the room with his arms already open, and his eyes were red-rimmed and his voice cracked when he said, "Raymond, thank God, we've been so worried." He pulled me into a hug that I allowed to last exactly 2 seconds before I stepped back and looked at him directly. "Tell me what happened," I said. Ethan exhaled a long, shaking breath that looked like grief. "She fell," he said. "God, Raymond, it happened so fast. We were at home. She was coming down the main staircase and her foot slipped, or maybe she missed a step. I don't know exactly. I wasn't right there. I heard the sound and I ran in and she was at the bottom and she wasn't." His voice broke. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. "She wasn't moving." Senator Vance stepped forward and extended his hand. "Raymond, Douglas Vance, I am so deeply sorry about Claire. She is a remarkable young woman, and our entire family is devastated." His grip was firm and dry and perfectly calibrated, the handshake of a man who had shaken 10,000 hands and remembered how hard to squeeze for each occasion. "Thank you," I said. I had spent 26 years listening to people tell me things that were not true. You develop a sensitivity to it, not a supernatural one, nothing dramatic, just the accumulation of thousands of hours of paying attention to the small things. The micro pause before a specific word, the sentence that contains one detail too many, the answer that comes a half-second faster than a real memory would produce it. Ethan's account of the fall had 3 of those tells in the first 90 seconds. He had said he was not right there when it happened, but he had described the sound of the fall precisely. Not the way a man who ran in afterward describes a sound, but the way a man who was standing nearby describes one. He had reached for the detail of the staircase carpeted 4 steps down into the sunken living room before I asked about the location. And when I asked him where Claire's phone was, his jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second before the concern came back into his face like a curtain being drawn. Her phone, he said. She might have had it in her hand when she fell. It might have broken. I don't know, Raymond. I wasn't thinking about her phone. I was thinking about her. Of course, I said. You're right. I'm sorry. Senator Vance touched my arm. Raymond, I want you to know that whatever Claire needs, whatever you both need, we will take care of it. This family does not abandon its own in a crisis. Whatever the medical bills come to, whatever the recovery requires, we will be there. He said it warmly. He said it the way a man says something he means. And the part of me that had spent 26 years in rooms with people who said things they did not mean, registered it the way a seismograph registers a tremor. Not loud, not dramatic, just a needle moving a fraction to the left of where it had been. Before I could respond, Dr. Sandra Okafor came through the double doors at the far end of the room. She was 44 years old and moved with the particular efficiency of someone who had been on her feet for 11 hours and had several more to go. She found my face in the waiting room, the way doctors find family members by looking for the person whose expression had not changed since they walked in. Mr. Calloway, she said, I'm Dr. Okafor. I operated on your daughter tonight. Claire came through the surgery. She has a subdural hematoma, bleeding between the brain and the skull, which we were able to address. She's currently in the ICU, and she is in a medically induced coma to allow her brain to rest and the swelling to reduce. The next 72 hours are critical. My chest caved in on one side, the way it does when you get news that is not the worst news, but is not good news either. I heard Nora make a sound beside me. She had arrived while Ethan was talking, her eyes swollen and her coat still on, and now she pressed both hands over her mouth, and her shoulders shook with the effort of not dissolving completely right there in the waiting room. Can I see her? Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thick with tears, she was barely holding back. In a little while, Dr. Okafor said gently, Let me get you to a family room first. Ethan and Senator Vance moved to follow. Dr. Okafor looked at them, then looked at me, and something passed across her expression. Not suspicion exactly, more like a decision being made. Mr. Calloway, she said, could I speak with you privately for just a moment first? Senator Vance's eyes moved to her face and stayed there 1 second too long. Of course, I said. She walked me to a small consultation room off the main corridor, a room with 2 chairs and a box of tissues on the table, and nothing else. She closed the door. Then she took a tablet from her coat pocket and held it so I could see the screen without her releasing it from her hand. I am required by California Penal Code 1160 to report injuries to law enforcement when the mechanism of injury described by accompanying persons does not appear consistent with the physical findings, she said. I want you to know that I filed that report at 11 o'clock tonight before you arrived, before anyone from the family spoke to me about the circumstances. I looked at the screen. The photographs showed Claire's injuries in clinical detail, the site of the head trauma. A bruise pattern on her right wrist that ran in 2 parallel lines across the inside of the joint. The kind of lines that come from fingers gripping hard enough to leave marks. My stomach dropped 6 inches. My throat went dry and tight, and I had to breathe slowly through my nose for a moment to keep my face where it needed to be. The wrist, I said. Yes, Dr. Okafor said. And the location of the head injury is inconsistent with the fall-down carpeted stairs of the height and angle described. The force required to produce this specific fracture pattern would typically result from impact against a harder, less forgiving surface. She paused. I have documented everything. The photographs are time-stamped to the hospital server. Automatic cannot be altered retroactively. I looked up from the tablet. Who controls the timestamp? The device or the server? Dr. Okafor looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not quite read. The server, she said. Automatic upload. The timestamp is set at the point of upload, not at the point of capture. Thank you, I said, for filing the report, for telling me. She nodded once. Mr. Calloway. I don't know what happened in that house tonight, but I know what I saw on that table. She held my gaze. Your daughter fought very hard to stay here. I walked back out into the corridor. Nora was standing against the wall with her arms wrapped around herself, her face crumpled and wet with tears. She'd stopped trying to hide, whispering something under her breath that might have been a prayer. I put my arm around her and she leaned into me and cried against my shoulder, her whole body trembling, and I held her and looked straight ahead at the double doors that led to the ICU, where my daughter was lying in a bed, breathing through a machine. Senator Vance was watching me from across the waiting room. He had the look of a man trying to read a document in a language he mostly understood. I gave him nothing to read. Nora finally let go of my arm around 1 in the morning, when a nurse came to tell us that Claire had been moved to the ICU and that we could see her briefly 2 people at a time, 5 minutes, no exceptions. Nora went first with Ethan, and I stayed in the waiting room with Senator Vance and a cup of coffee I had gotten from a machine in the hallway that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the previous administration. The waiting room had emptied out in the last hour. 2 other families remained: a young man sleeping across 3 chairs with a jacket over his face and an elderly woman working a rosary with her eyes closed. The overhead lights hummed at a frequency that settled behind your eyes after a while and stayed there. Senator Vance sat down across from me. He did not rush. He had the patience of a man accustomed to letting other people fill silence because, in his experience, people who filled silence gave you things you could use. I did not fill the silence. I drank the bad coffee and waited. Raymond, he said, finally leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his voice pitched low and warm, the voice he probably used at constituent meetings when someone came to him with a problem they needed solved. I want to speak to you plainly, man to man. What happened tonight was a terrible accident. Claire is strong. She is going to come through this. And when she does, our family is going to make absolutely sure she has everything she needs to recover fully. That's generous, I said. It's not generosity, he said. It's family. He paused, letting the words settle. I know this has been a shock. I know you are frightened for your daughter. That is completely understandable. But I also know that fear can sometimes push people toward decisions that create more problems than they solve, involving outside parties, making accusations before we have all the facts. He looked at me steadily. I would hate to see a painful situation become unnecessarily complicated. I looked at him over the rim of the coffee cup. He was good. 22 years in California politics. And he had learned to say a threat in the exact same tone of voice as a kindness so that you were never quite sure which one you had received. I appreciate you sharing that, I said. He studied my face for a moment, searching for something, anger, fear, understanding anything he could work with. I gave him a pleasant, tired expression and nothing else. I'll think about what you've said, I told him. He nodded slowly, satisfied enough, and sat back. He thought he had delivered his message. He thought I was a worried father from Queens, who understood now that the room was bigger than he had realized, and the people in it were more powerful than he was prepared to handle. He thought the conversation was over. It was just beginning. I stood up to get another cup of coffee, not because I wanted it, but because I needed to move, needed 30 seconds away from that man's eyes. And when I came back around the corner of the vending alcove, I stopped. Lily was standing next to my chair. Nora had called Claire's neighbor a woman named Janet, who had a key to the Bel Air house and sometimes watched Lily on short notice, and Janet had driven her to the hospital when the call came in. That was the kind of thing Claire had arranged for quietly, the same way she arranged everything. She was 8 years old and small for her age, with Claire's dark eyes and the kind of serious expression that children get when they have been told that something important is happening, but no one has explained exactly what. She was wearing pajamas with small yellow stars on them and sneakers that someone had put on her feet in a hurry, left shoe on the right foot. She had a small backpack over both shoulders, the kind with cartoon characters on it, that she probably used for school, and she was holding the straps with both hands so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. My granddaughter. I had last seen her 6 weeks ago when I drove down from Queens for her birthday. She had made me eat 2 pieces of cake and told me very seriously that her favorite dinosaur was the Ankylosaurus because it had armor. Now she was standing in a hospital waiting room at 1 a.m. with her shoes on the wrong feet, and her jaw set with a determination that made my chest ache so sharply I had to breathe through it. I walked over and crouched down in front of her so we were at the same level. "Hey, Bug," I said softly. Her chin wobbled, her eyes filled up immediately huge, dark, brimming, but she pressed her lips together and did not cry the way a child does when they have decided that crying is not allowed right now because there is something they have to do first. "Grandpa," she said, her voice was barely above a whisper, "I have something for you." She let go of one strap of the backpack, reached around to the front pocket with careful, deliberate hands and unzipped it slowly. She reached inside and took out a tablet, an older model. The screen scratched at one corner, the case a faded blue. She held it out to me with both hands the way you hand someone something that is very important and must not be dropped. "Mommy said, only give this to Grandpa," Lily said. "She said don't give it to anybody else. She said especially—" She stopped, swallowed, her voice dropped even lower. "She said especially not Daddy." The weight of that sentence landed in the center of my chest and spread outward like something cracking. My hands were steady when I took the tablet. Years of training muscle memory that does not ask permission, but underneath that steadiness, my heart was hammering, and my throat had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with composure and everything to do with the fact that my daughter had known. She had known something might happen to her, and the last thing she had done before it did was make sure her 8-year-old remembered one instruction. Only Grandpa. I looked at Lily very carefully. "Did anyone see you take this out?" I asked. She shook her head. "Mommy put it in my bag herself, at home, before—" Her chin wobbled again harder this time, and one tear escaped down her left cheek. She swiped at it furiously with the back of her hand. "Before she got hurt. Did you tell anyone you had it, anyone at all?" "No." She said it with absolute certainty, the certainty of a child who has been given a very important job and has not failed at it. "Mommy said just you." I put my hand on her shoulder. "You did exactly right," I told her. "You did perfectly, Lily. I'm so proud of you." That was when she broke. The sob came out of her like something that had been held back for hours, raw and ragged and full of the particular terror of a child who does not understand what is happening, but understands that it is very bad. She pitched forward and I caught her, and she buried her face against my neck and cried with her whole body, her small shoulders heaving, her fingers gripping the back of my jacket, so hard I could feel her knuckles through the fabric. I held her and let her cry. I pressed my hand against the back of her head and looked across the waiting room at Senator Vance, who was watching us from his chair with an expression of practiced sympathy that did not reach his eyes at all. After a few minutes, Nora came back from the ICU, her face-wrecked eyes red and swollen, nearly shut, walking like someone who had just had the ground removed from under them. She stopped when she saw Lily in my arms and made a sound that was half relief, half fresh grief, and crossed the room to wrap her arms around both of us. "I've got her," I told Nora quietly. "Take her for a few minutes. I need some air." Nora nodded, pulling Lily gently away from me, murmuring into the little girl's hair. I slipped the tablet into the inside pocket of my jacket, felt its weight settle against my ribs, and walked out through the automatic doors into the Los Angeles night. The air outside was warm and smelled like exhaust and the distant suggestion of ocean. I stood in the ambulance bay with my hand pressed flat against the tablet through my jacket and looked up at the sky, which was the particular orange-gray of a city that never gets fully dark. Claire had put that tablet in Lily's bag. Before everything went wrong, she had already known it might. She had already made a plan. She had already thought about who to trust. She had thought of me. I pulled out my phone and booked a room at a motel in Koreatown, cash anonymous, nothing connected to my name that anyone watching would find in the first pass. Then, I went back inside, sat with Nora and Lily, until the little girl finally fell asleep across 2 chairs, with her head in Nora's lap, and waited until the clock on the wall read 2:53 before I stood up and said, I needed to step out for a while. Nora looked up at me with eyes that were raw and exhausted and asked, "Where are you going?" "To find out what happened to our daughter," I said. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once and looked back down at Lily's sleeping face. I walked out into the night with a tablet in my jacket and 26 years of knowing how to disappear, and I drove toward Koreatown, and I did not look back. The motel on Normandy Avenue in Koreatown was the kind of place that asked no questions if you paid in cash, which I did 2 nights, $63 a room, on the second floor at the end of the corridor, away from the ice machine. The carpet was the color of something that had once been burgundy. The air conditioner rattled when it ran, and the bathroom light took 4 seconds to warm up. It was perfect. I sat on the edge of the bed, set the tablet on my knee, and opened the folder marked Evidence Do Not Delete. There was one video file. Claire had named it Eth Vance Room, SEP 05 MP4, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I pressed play. The footage was shaky shot, through a door that had been opened maybe 2 inches. The camera angled downward slightly the way a phone is held when someone is trying to keep it still without bracing it against anything. The room beyond the door was well-lit wood-paneled, the kind of room that exists in houses where the interior design cost more than most people's annual salary. There was a long table visible, and on it were stacked documents, manila folders, and what looked like a laptop with an external drive connected to it. Ethan was standing with his back partially to the camera, gesturing at something on the table. He was speaking, but his voice was low, and I could only catch fragments, numbers, account names, something about timing. 2 men stood across from him. One was heavy-set mid-40s with close-cropped gray hair and a scar that ran from his left jawline toward his ear. The other was leaner, younger by maybe a decade, with the particular stillness of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible in a room. I watched it through once without stopping. Then I watched it again. This time, I paused at the 27-second mark when the camera shifted slightly and caught the face of the heavy-set man more clearly in the light from the window. My stomach turned over hard. I knew that face, not from a photograph from 14 months of surveillance work in 2015, when I had spent the better part of a year and a half trying to build a case against a financial network that moved money through a chain of shell companies so intricate it took a team of 6 analysts 8 months just to map the first 3 layers. The heavy-set man with the scar was Victor Crane, born in Phoenix, Arizona, American, who had spent 20 years building himself into one of the most effective money movement specialists on the West Coast. We had watched him for 14 months. We had never been able to prove who gave him his instructions from the top. I tapped forward to the 41-second mark and paused again on the lean man's face. Dale Morrow, Dallas, Texas, originally, had done 2 years in a federal corrections facility in 2009 on a wire fraud charge that was, in retrospect, the smallest thing he had ever done. He had been Crane's operational partner for at least 6 years before I retired, possibly longer. I set the tablet down on the bed and stood up. The room was small enough that 3 steps took me to the window. I pulled the curtain back an inch and looked at Normandy Avenue below empty. At this hour, a traffic light cycling through its colors for nobody. A convenience store with its lights still on across the street. For 14 months, I had tried to find the name at the top of that network, the person providing political cover, financial legitimacy, the kind of protection that keeps federal investigations from gaining traction. The case had been closed in March of 2016. Insufficient evidence. I had put in my retirement paperwork 11 months later. The name at the top had been Douglas Vance, and his son had been running the operational side. And my daughter had walked through a door that was open 2 inches and recorded 4 minutes and 12 seconds of evidence that connected all of it. And then she had run to her daughter's bedroom, and she had made a copy, and then she had fallen down a staircase that I did not believe for 1 second she had fallen down on her own. I pressed my fist against the window frame and held it there until the knuckle went white. My jaw was clenched so tight I could feel it in my back teeth. The rage was there. It was absolutely there, hot and specific and directed. But rage was not useful right now, and I had learned a long time ago to put it somewhere. It could not make decisions for me. I went back to the bed, opened the subfolder marked unsent. 1 draft message, addressed to my number, time-stamped 4:51 p.m. on September 5th, hours before the surgery, hours before the call from Cedars-Sinai, hours before everything. Dad, I need to talk to you. I found something. Can you call me tonight? 7 words and a question. She had typed them and then not sent them. Maybe she had thought she would call instead. Maybe she had run out of time. Either way, she had known enough to be afraid, and she had thought of me, and she had not made it to the phone. My eyes burned. My chest felt like something inside it had been wrung out and left to dry. I sat on the edge of that bed in a $63 motel room in Koreatown, and I read that unsent message 4 times, and I let myself feel the full weight of it for exactly 90 seconds. Then I reached under the seat of my car I had parked in the motel lot and retrieved it before coming upstairs, and I took out the prepaid phone I kept there. I had carried a prepaid phone in my car since the day I retired. Old habit. Claire had never known about it. Neither had Nora. I dialed a number I had not called in 3 years. It rang twice. Then a voice low, unhurried, fully awake despite the hour, because Marcus Webb had spent 23 years learning to sleep like a cat, lightly, and with one ear always open. "Yeah," Marcus said. "It's Raymond." A pause of about 2 seconds. "How bad now, bad am I?" said. "I need you in LA, tonight if you can." "Is this about Claire?" I looked at the paused video on the tablet screen. Ethan's back, the table of documents, 2 faces I had spent 14 months trying to put in a courtroom. "Yes," I said. "And it's about something else, too. I'll explain when you get here." Another pause, shorter this time. "I'll be there by 6, Marcus said, and ended the call. I set the prepaid phone on the nightstand. I picked up the tablet and watched the last 3 minutes of the video. Ethan talking, gesturing, the 2 men nodding. 4 minutes and 12 seconds that connected a 14-month investigation to a California state senator to a man who had put my daughter in a medically induced coma to keep her from making a phone call. I had come to Los Angeles as a father. That had not changed. But I was also something else, and that something else had just recognized the shape of the room it was walking into. Raw footage from an anonymous source with no chain of custody would be challenged and potentially suppressed before it reached a courtroom. I needed corroboration financial records, ownership traces, a second witness, before I handed anything to anyone. A case built in 8 days is a case that holds. A case built in 1 night is a case that gets thrown out on emotion. I turned off the tablet screen, lay back on the bed with my shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling until the light outside the curtain began to change from black to gray. I was back at Cedars-Sinai by 5:30 in the morning with a paper cup of coffee from a gas station's on Wilshire and a clean shirt I had bought from a 24-hour Walgreens 3 blocks from the motel. The shirt was stiff and smelled like plastic packaging, and I did not care even slightly. Claire's room in the ICU was on the 4th floor. The charge nurse at the station told me visiting hours did not begin until 8, but she looked at my face and at the coffee and at the shirt with the Walgreens tag still on the collar, and she said, 5 minutes, and pointed me down the hall. I stood in the doorway of my daughter's room for those 5 minutes and did not go in. I could see her from where I stood, the machines, the tubes, the particular stillness of a person whose body is working very hard at something invisible. Her face was pale and slack in the way that faces are when consciousness has been removed from them. She looked younger than 31. She looked the way she had looked at 9 years old when she used to fall asleep on the couch watching television, and I would carry her to bed, and the memory of that hit me somewhere behind my sternum with a force that made me grip the doorframe hard enough to feel the edge of it bite into my palm. I went back to the waiting room. I sat down. I took the tablet out of my jacket and I opened a financial document that had nothing to do with Claire's case, a quarterly report I had been reviewing for a client back in Queens, and I began to read it out loud in a low voice steadily, because I needed to do something with my hands and my voice and the part of my brain that was not currently doing the work of staying upright. A night nurse named Baptiste passed by twice and glanced at me with the expression of someone who had seen many strange things in hospital waiting rooms and had learned to let most of them go. At 9 o'clock, Ethan arrived. He was freshly showered and wore a pressed shirt, and his eyes were red in a way that could have been grief, or could have been a sleepless night spent doing things that had nothing to do with grief. He asked how I was holding up. He asked if I had eaten. He offered again to arrange a better hotel. "I'm fine where I am," I told him. "But thank you, Ethan." He nodded. He looked at the tablet in my hand. I was holding it with the screen facing me, the financial document still open. His gaze stayed on it for exactly 1 second longer than it needed to, and then he looked away and said he was going to get coffee. I watched him go and thought about that 1 extra second. At 11 o'clock, I walked out to the parking structure on the 3rd level and found Marcus Webb leaning against a dark blue rental sedan on the 2nd row, eating an apple and checking his phone. He was 55 years old and looked 50 built, like someone who had spent decades in situations where staying physically capable was not optional. He had retired from the department 2 years before I did and built a small private investigations firm out of a warehouse office in Van Nuys. 3 people, no website, the kind of operation that exists entirely on referrals from people who needed things done correctly and quietly. His hair had gone almost entirely gray since I had last seen him, and he had the particular quality of stillness that some men develop after long enough in the work, not passivity, but the deliberate conservation of energy, like a machine that runs on minimum power until it needs to run on maximum. He looked up when he heard my footsteps and said, "You look terrible." "I've been up since 9:47 yesterday," I said. "That explains the shirt." He pushed off the car and held out his hand, and when I took it, he gripped it hard and held it a beat longer than a regular handshake and said, "How is she?" "Alive," I said. "Induced coma. 72 hours critical." Marcus pressed his lips together. He had met Claire exactly 4 times over the years, at the occasional dinner when I was still married to Nora, and he had sent her a card when she graduated from her CPA program, which was exactly the kind of thing Marcus did that most people who knew him professionally would not have expected. He nodded once tightly and said, "Okay, tell me everything." We stood in the parking structure for 20 minutes. I told him everything. The injury pattern, Dr. Okafor, the tablet, the video, Crane Morrow, the unsent message. Marcus listened without interrupting. He ate the apple down to the core and then held the core in his hand because there was nowhere to put it, and he was not the kind of man who dropped things on the ground. When I finished, he said, "Crane and Morrow." "Yes, we had them for 14 months. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, turning the apple core in his fingers. Then he said, "You think the senator was the top. I think the senator's name is going to be on paper somewhere that connects to those 2 men and to $300 million moving through shell companies over 6 years. Marcus looked at me steadily. "You want to find the paper." "I want to find everything," I said. "The right way. Nothing that can't be used." He dropped the apple core into a trash can 6 feet away without looking at it. "I'll need access to the financial data in the video. Resolution's probably not great, but I can work with partial account numbers if the documents are visible long enough." He paused. "I'm also going to need coffee. Real coffee, not whatever that is." He gestured at my gas station cup. "There's a place on Vermont," I said. "Of course there is. This is Koreatown." He picked up his bag from the back seat of the rental. "I'll set up at the motel. You go back upstairs and be the worried father." "I am the worried father," I said. He looked at me. "I know," he said, and his voice had something in it that it did not usually have. "I know you are Raymond." We separated in the stairwell. I went up. He went down. Back on the 4th floor, I found Nora in the waiting room, with Lily asleep across her lap. Again, the little girl's shoes finely on the correct feet, her small face peaceful in a way that made my throat tighten all over again. Nora looked up when I sat down beside her, and her eyes were dry. Now she had moved past the acute stage of crying into something quieter and more sustained, the kind of grief that settles in for a long stay. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "A little," I said, which was not entirely a lie. I had closed my eyes for perhaps 40 minutes on the motel bed before giving up. "Raymond." She said my name the way she used to say it when we were married, and she needed me to stop doing whatever I was doing and actually listen. "What happened to our daughter?" I looked at Lily's sleeping face. The little girl's hand was curled loosely under her chin, fingers slightly open. She had trusted me completely, handed me something her mother had told her was important, and gone to sleep believing that I would handle it. That trust weighed more than the tablet did. "I'm finding out," I told Nora. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now." I met her eyes. "I need you to trust me for a few days. Can you do that?" She studied my face for a long moment, looking for something reassuring certainty, some sign that I knew more than I was saying. I gave her the truth of it, which was that I knew enough to be moving and not yet enough to be sure. "A few days," she said finally, her voice tight and unhappy. "And then you tell me what's going on." "Yes," I said. She nodded, then her phone buzzed and she looked down at the screen and her face changed something, crossing it that she smoothed out quickly, but not quickly enough. "What?" I asked. "It's a number I don't recognize," she said. "They're asking if I have any of Claire's documents at home. They said they're from her insurance company." She looked up. "I didn't give anyone this number, Raymond." My chest went cold and still. I took Nora's phone gently from her hand and looked at the text message. No company name, no policy number. Just a question about documents phrased in the careful language of someone who knew enough to sound legitimate without committing to anything specific. Don't respond to this, I told her. Don't respond to anyone who contacts you about Claire. Not by phone, not by text, not at the door. Nobody. Nora's eyes went wide. Raymond, trust me, I said again, and I handed her phone back and stood up. I need to make a call. I walked to the far end of the corridor, pulled out the prepaid phone, and called Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. Already set up. What do you need? They contacted Nora, I said. Text message unknown number, asking about documents. They're trying to figure out what I have. I heard Marcus's keyboard stop. They don't know about the tablet, he said. If they knew, they wouldn't be asking. Correct, I said. Which means Ethan still thinks the evidence is in the cloud. A pause. I pulled the account activity on Claire's primary email this morning. She had listed me as emergency account contact 2 years ago, when she set up the backup authentication. Someone attempted to reset her password 3 times last night, between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. All 3 attempts were blocked by 2-factor authentication. The verification codes went to her phone, which they don't have. 2-factor authentication works by sending a one-time numeric code to a trusted device. In this case, Claire's personal cell phone, whenever someone attempts to access the account from an unrecognized device or location. Without the code from the phone, the reset cannot be completed. Ethan had destroyed Claire's phone, thinking he had cut off her ability to protect her accounts. He had not realized that destroying the phone meant destroying his own ability to access them. He's looking in the wrong place, I said. Completely, Marcus said. He has no idea the backup exists. I stood in that corridor with the prepaid phone against my ear and the noise of the hospital around me, monitors, beeping, a cart rolling past, someone laughing at the nurse's station, at something that had nothing to do with any of this, and I understood for the first time the full shape of what my daughter had done. She had not just copied the evidence. She had copied it to a device that no one would think to look for, given it to a person no one would think to ask, and left a message for the one person who would know what to do with it. All in the space of however many minutes she had before Ethan came through that door. She had done it right. She had done it exactly right. Keep going on the financial analysis, I told Marcus. I'll check in tonight. Raymond, he said before I could hang up. Yeah, she's going to be okay. It was not a medical opinion. Marcus had no way of knowing that, but he said it the way you say things that need to be said out loud, regardless of whether you can prove them, and I held on to it for a moment before I answered. Yeah, I said, she is. Thomas Greer arrived at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, carrying a leather portfolio, the color of old whiskey, and the expression of a man who fully expected to be home by noon. He was 51 years old, silver at the temples, with the kind of tailored confidence that comes from 22 years of making problems disappear before they became headlines. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and a business card that listed 3 different office addresses, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously the Vance family was taking this particular Sunday morning. Nora was beside me. She straightened when she saw him coming, her jaw tightening, her hand finding my arm. Mr. Calloway, Greer said, settling into the chair across from us with the unhurried ease of a man on his own turf. I want to start by saying how deeply sorry the Vance family is about Claire. This has been devastating for all of us. He opened the portfolio. I'm here because Senator Vance and Ethan want to make sure that Claire gets absolutely everything she needs to recover fully. Whatever the medical costs come to the surgery, the ICU, the rehabilitation, they want to cover it entirely. No limits, no conditions. Nora's grip on my arm tightened until I could feel each individual finger. That's very generous, I said. It's family, Greer said, and I heard the senator's exact phrasing in his mouth like a script. He slid a document across the low table between us, 15 pages clean, formatting the kind of paperwork that looks straightforward until you read it carefully. This is a mutual non-disclosure agreement, standard language. The family asks that you refrain from making public statements about the circumstances of Claire's injury and that you not initiate contact with media outlets. In exchange, they cover all medical expenses and Claire's rehabilitation costs in full. Nora leaned forward, her voice sharp and raw. You want us to stay quiet about what happened to my daughter. Mrs. Calloway, Greer said smoothly, this agreement simply keeps a painful family situation from becoming a public spectacle. It protects Claire's privacy as much as anyone's. Nora's eyes filled with tears, not soft tears, but the hot, furious kind, the kind that come when grief turns a corner into anger. Her privacy? She repeated, her voice cracking at the edges. She is lying in that room right now, with tubes in her, and you are talking to me about privacy. Nora. I put my hand over hers. She stopped, but her whole body was shaking with the effort of it, her breath coming in short, unsteady pulls. I picked up the document and read it, all 15 pages. Greer waited with the patience of a man who had done this before and knew that people eventually signed. I read every clause, every defined term, every limitation on scope. On page 5, I found what I was looking for, or more precisely what I was looking for, was not there. The agreement prohibited public statements. It prohibited initiating contact with media. It required Raymond Calloway to refrain from making representations about the Vance family to third parties. It said nothing about cooperation with federal investigators. It said nothing about responding to a grand jury subpoena. It said nothing about voluntarily providing information to the FBI or the IRS. In American law, no private NDA can legally prevent a person from cooperating with a federal investigation. The moment a contract attempts to obstruct federal process, it becomes unenforceable and potentially criminal in itself. Greer had written this document to silence a grieving father in the press. He had not written it to stop a federal inquiry, because stopping a federal inquiry with a civil contract is not something that can be done. He had handed me a lock that did not fit the door he was trying to close. I signed it, all 15 pages, handed it back. Greer's shoulders dropped half an inch with relief. He smiled, genuine, satisfied, the smile of a man who had solved a problem before lunch. Thank you, Raymond. I know this isn't easy. The family truly... Thank you for coming, I said. He shook my hand, nodded at Nora, and left with his leather portfolio and his 3 office addresses and his absolute certainty that he had just handled the situation. Nora turned to me. The moment he was through the door, her eyes still wet, her voice barely controlled. Why did you sign that? Raymond, why did you just sign that? I watched Greer disappear around the corner toward the elevators. Then I looked at her. Because it doesn't say what he thinks it says, I told her. Not even close. She stared at me. Something shifted in her expression, confusion giving way to something older, something from the 14 years she had spent married to a man whose job she was never fully allowed to understand. What are you going to do? She asked. I stood up and picked up my jacket. The right thing, I said. The slow way. The only way it sticks. Marcus called at 2 in the afternoon, while I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, eating a sandwich I did not taste and reading a news article I did not absorb. I need you to drive to Long Beach, he said. Bring the tablet. I was in the car in 4 minutes. He was waiting for me at a parking lot off Pier A at the port of Long Beach, leaning on the hood of his rental, with a paper coffee cup and a printed map folded into quarters. The port stretched out behind him, cranes the height of apartment buildings, container ships stacked 6 stories with boxes of every color, the particular industrial smell of salt water mixed with diesel and hot metal. Even on a Sunday afternoon, the place moved. Ports do not rest. Walk me through it, I said. Marcus unfolded the map. He had circled one berth in red ink, berth 217 Terminal B. Pacific Meridian Logistics, he said. Delaware registered 2019, single shareholder listed as a holding company in Nevada. That Nevada company has one director, a man named Patrick Ryle, who is 73 years old and lives in Scottsdale, and has in the past 11 years served as a registered director on 46 different companies in 9 states without ever appearing to have done anything for any of them. Though a nominee director, I said, someone paid to put their name on paper and ask no questions, a common tool for obscuring real ownership. Correct, Marcus said. I traced Pacific Meridian back through 4 layers. The beneficial owner, the actual person or entity with real control, is a holding company called Meridian Capital Partners, LLC. Meridian Capital Partners was formed in Delaware in 2018. Its registered agent is a firm in Wilmington that handles incorporation paperwork for 1,200 companies. But the EIN filing lists a management address in Sacramento, California. He looked at me. Same zip code as Senator Vance's district office. I looked at the berth. A white container ship sat low in the water, being worked by 2 cranes in slow mechanical rhythm. Pacific Meridian Logistics painted on the side in blue letters. Cash transit, I said. And that's what it looks like. Wire transfers leave electronic trails that can be subpoenaed. Physical currency moved through a cargo operation is harder to trace, especially if the manifests show legitimate freight, which they do. Pacific Meridian files, clean manifests, textiles mostly, industrial equipment. Marcus folded the map. But the ship makes 8 runs a year on a route that doesn't quite make sense economically for the cargo it claims to carry. The margins don't work unless something else is moving with it. I stood there looking at that ship for a long moment. $340 million, 6 years, 11 companies, 1 boat that filed clean paperwork and ran routes that did not pencil out, and a senator's name on a management address in Sacramento. "There's something else," Marcus said. His tone had shifted not dramatically, just a degree or two, cooler the way it did when he was about to tell me something I was not going to like. "The detective who caught Claire's case," he said, "LAPD Hollywood Division, Dana Reyes, 39, 9 years on the force. She filed the intake report based on Dr. Okafor's referral Friday night. The case was marked active as of Saturday morning." "Was," I said. "As of Saturday morning, a city councilman named Robert Daly called the captain of Hollywood Division. Daly sits on the city's budget committee. He has influence over department funding allocations and personnel decisions, not command authority, but the kind of relationship where a phone call gets returned fast." Marcus looked at me steadily. 2 hours after that call, Detective Reyes was pulled into her captain's office and told the case needed to be handled carefully. The file was reclassified from active investigation to pending review. I felt the cold settle in my chest again, the same cold that had been there since Nora showed me that text message about documents. Not surprise, just the confirmation of something I had already suspected. "Daly is connected to Vance," I said. "Campaign finance records are public in California," Marcus said. "Vance Capital donated $42,000 to Daly's last 3 campaigns. Legal limit each time, clean on paper." He paused. The phone call was not clean. I turned away from the ship and looked at the parking lot, the afternoon sun hitting the concrete at an angle that made everything look slightly bleached. A family walked past, 2 parents, 3 kids, the youngest one demanding to be carried. Sunday at the port. Normal life happening 600 feet from evidence of $340 million in fraud. "This detective?" I said. "Dana Reyes, is she the kind of person who noticed what happened to her case?" Marcus considered that. "Her record is clean, no complaints, 2 commendations made detective in 7 years, which is faster than average. She put the initial intake report in within 2 hours of receiving Dr. Okafor's referral, which means she moved on it quickly when it was still hers to move on." He picked up his coffee cup. "Someone who moves that fast on a Friday night report and then watches her case get reclassified on a Saturday morning. Yeah, I think she noticed." "Then she's someone I need to talk to," I said. "Carefully," Marcus said. "She doesn't know you exist, and if the wrong person finds out you're approaching department personnel, it gives Daly something to use." "I know how to approach someone carefully," I said. Marcus looked at me with the expression he used when he thought I was stating something too obvious to need, stating which in 23 years of working together had happened more times than I could count. "I know you do," he said. "I'm saying it anyway." We stood there for another minute looking at the ship. The cranes moved in their slow rhythm, lifting and placing, the port doing what ports do, regardless of what moved inside the containers. "Raymond?" Marcus said quietly. "Yeah. $340 million over 6 years. He was not asking a question. He was doing what he sometimes did, saying a number out loud to make it real, to make sure neither of us was treating it as abstract. That's not a side operation. That's infrastructure. That's something somebody built deliberately and protected carefully for a long time." "I know," I said, "which means the people who built it are not going to stop at a text message to Nora." I looked at the ship one more time. Pacific Meridian Logistics, clean manifests, routes that did not pencil out. "No," I said, "they're not." I drove back to the hospital. The SUV that had been following me since Saturday was 2 cars back the entire way. I bought flowers from a stand on the corner of Wilshire, and San Vicente yellow ones, Claire's favorite since she was 7 years old, and I carried them up to the 4th floor and set them on the table beside her bed and sat down and began to read aloud from a quarterly report in my flat, unhurried voice. The SUV was in the hospital parking structure when I came out 4 hours later. Same spot, same 2 men, Good, I thought. Stay right there. I waited in the parking lot of LAPD Hollywood Division for 2 hours and 14 minutes on Monday morning before Dana Reyes came out alone. The intake report had listed her as D. Reyes, and that was how I had found her. She was 39 years old and moved like someone who had learned early that looking unhurried was its own form of authority. Dark hair pulled back, plain clothes, dark slacks, gray jacket with the particular alertness of a person whose job required her to assess every room she walked into before she fully entered it. She was heading toward a gray Chevy Impala, 3 rows over, when I stepped into her path, at a distance that was close enough to be intentional and far enough to not be threatening. "Detective Reyes," I said, "my name is Raymond Calloway. Claire Vance is my daughter." She stopped. Her right hand moved not to her weapon, but to her side, the practiced stillness of someone running options. She looked at me for 3 full seconds before she spoke. "How did you find me?" she asked. "You filed the intake report Friday night," I said. "Your name is on the document." She studied my face. "Mr. Calloway, if you have concerns about your daughter's case, the appropriate channel is—" "Someone called your captain Saturday morning," I said. 2 hours later, your case went from active to pending review. I'm asking if you're the kind of detective who noticed that." Something shifted behind her eyes, quick controlled, but there. She noticed. She had absolutely noticed. I held out my badge, NYPD, retired, and a plain envelope. 26 years undercover. I'm not here to cause problems for you. I'm here because my daughter is in a medically induced coma, and the people responsible have enough influence to make a police report disappear over a weekend. She took the envelope, but did not open it. "What's in here?" 3 pages, summary only, enough for you to understand what you're looking at. She looked at the envelope, looked at my badge, looked at my face with a careful, calibrated assessment of someone who had spent 9 years reading people in interrogation rooms. "I need to verify who you are before this conversation goes any further," she said. Her voice was flat and professional, giving nothing away. "I don't take packages from strangers in parking lots, Mr. Calloway, even strangers with retired badges." "I know," I said. "Take 48 hours. Run my name. Read what's in the envelope on your own time in your own home, not in that building." I nodded toward the division. "Then decide." She held the envelope at her side. "And if I decide this isn't something I want to be involved in, then I won't contact you again," I said. "But I think you already know something is wrong with that case. I think you knew before I got here." Her jaw tightened a fraction, barely visible. She was good at keeping her face, but not quite good enough to hide that one. "I'll be in touch," she said, and walked to her car. I drove back to Cedars-Sinai. Upstairs, Claire's numbers were stable. The attending physician used the word encouraging, which in ICU language means things have not gotten worse, which is its own form of good news. I sat beside her bed and held her hand, and felt how still she was, how the machines around her were doing the work that her body was supposed to do on its own, and my throat tightened until I had to breathe deliberately through it. "I found them," I told her quietly. "Both of them, the ones from the room." I ran my thumb across her knuckles, careful, barely touching the way you hold something fragile. "You did everything right, Claire. You did it exactly right. I just need a little more time." Her hand did not move. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The afternoon light came through the window blinds in long, parallel lines across the floor. I stayed until visiting hours ended. Then I drove to Koreatown, checked in with Marcus, and went to sleep for the first time in 3 days, with my phone on the pillow beside me, waiting for a detective to run my name and make a decision. The SUV had been with me since Saturday. Black California plates, 2 men in the front seat, who rotated shifts but never quite rotated far enough away, that I stopped seeing the same vehicle in my mirrors at the same intervals. Monday night, leaving the hospital at 10 o'clock, I decided to have a conversation with them without speaking a word. I did not drive to Koreatown. I drove west on Sunset, then south on Laurel Canyon, then east on Fountain, a route that made no geographic sense for anyone heading to a motel in Koreatown, which was exactly the point. The SUV followed every turn without hesitation, which told me they had been briefed on my rental car's description and plate, and not much else. They were watchers, not operators. Someone had told them to find out what I had and who I was talking to. I pulled into a Korean barbecue restaurant on Vermont Avenue and went inside and ordered galbi and a glass of water and sat at a table by the window. The SUV parked half a block north. Neither man got out. I ate slowly. I checked my phone. I looked like a tired man eating dinner alone, which was not entirely a performance. From the restroom, I called Marcus. Black SUV Vermont just north of Olympic, I said. 2 men been on me since Saturday, registered to a private security firm. I need the ownership chain. Give me 20 minutes, Marcus said, and hung up. I finished my galby, paid in cash, drove back to the Koreatown motel at a completely normal speed, watching the SUV follow me the whole way, and I walked upstairs and called Marcus from the room. Arden Security Solutions, he said. LLC registered in Nevada, 2021. Primary client on record is Vance Capital. The 2 men in that vehicle are contracted employees, licensed, clean records, nothing interesting. A pause. They're not there to hurt you, Raymond. They're there to find out what you have. Which means Ethan still doesn't know about the tablet, I said. Correct. If he knew, he wouldn't be watching. He'd be moving. Marcus's voice was flat and certain. He thinks you're a frightened father who might have stumbled onto something in the cloud. He wants to know before he decides what to do about it. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and looked at the window. The curtain closed, the parking lot lights bleeding through the edges. Then I'm going to stay frightened, I said. Raymond, I'm going to buy flowers every morning. I'm going to sit in the cafeteria and read the newspaper. I'm going to call Nora at 7 p.m. like a man who has nothing else to do. I looked at the curtain. They report back that I'm just a worried father with no activity worth noting. Ethan relaxes, and when Ethan relaxes, he stops being careful. Marcus was quiet for a moment. How long? 10 days, I said. Maybe less. I need Marcus. I need you to finish the financial analysis. I need the full ownership chain on Pacific Meridian. I need everything documented and sourced before I send anything to anyone. I'll have it in 4 days, he said. 3, I said. He exhaled the specific sound of a man recalculating. 3 days, but you're buying the coffee. I almost smiled. Almost. Then Marcus said in a different register entirely. Ethan reviewed the security camera footage at the Bel Air house tonight. I picked it up through a monitoring service he uses. The footage request was logged. A pause that had weight to it. He pulled the recording from the hallway outside Lily's room. The timestamp shows Claire entered that room 4 minutes before the fall. My jaw locked. My hands went absolutely still on my knees. He knows, I said. He suspects, Marcus said. He knows Claire went into that room. He doesn't know what she did there. He's going to start looking at Lily. The cold that moved through me then was not the cold of fear. It was something older and more specific, the cold of a man who has just understood that the people he is dealing with are willing to look in a child's direction to find what they need. Lily stays with Nora, I said. Nora doesn't go anywhere alone. And Marcus, nobody talks to that little girl. Nobody. Understood, Marcus said. I hung up, sat in that room for a long time, listening to the air conditioner rattle. Then I lay down on top of the covers with my shoes still on and stared at the ceiling and thought about a little girl in star pajamas handing me a tablet with both hands, and I made myself a promise that I intended to keep. Outside in the parking lot, the SUV was right where I expected it to be. Good, I thought again. Eyes on me means eyes off Lily. If you are still with me on Revenge Dad right now, drop the number 10 in the comments so I know you are here. Because what I am about to tell you next is the moment I realized how deep this really went. Raymond thought he was the only one being targeted. He was wrong. Someone else's name had already been written on paper without her knowledge, without her consent, and used as a weapon against him. A quick note, this story contains some fictional elements crafted for storytelling and educational purposes. Parts of it may not reflect any specific events. If that is not your kind of content, no hard feelings at all. You can step away right here. Marcus put a single sheet of paper on the table in front of me at 7:45 Tuesday morning and did not say anything. He just set it down and stepped back and let me read it. The paper was a summary printout, 3 columns, 11 rows. Each row a company name, a state of registration, and a listed contact person. I read down the list: Delaware, Nevada, California, Delaware again, Nevada again. And then on the 4th row from the bottom, Nora Calloway, Queens, New York. I read it twice. Then I set the paper flat on the table and pressed my palm down on it and looked at the wall. Walk me through it, I said. My voice came out steady. I was grateful for that. Marcus pulled up a chair. Ethan used her social security number and home address to open bank accounts under 3 of the 11 LLCs. Delaware allows formation without direct signature In many cases, the registered agent handles the paperwork. But to open a functioning business bank account, you need a social security number and a name. He used hers. Marcus kept his voice clinical and factual, the way he always did when the information was personal. The accounts received wire transfers totaling approximately $41 million over 4 years. The money moved through within 48 hours each time and was gone before any quarterly reporting cycle. She had no idea, I said. None. There is no record of her ever being contacted by the registered agent, the bank, or anyone associated with the LLCs. No correspondence to her address. No signature. Her name and number were used the way you use a tool, picked up, applied, put back down. I stood up and walked to the window. The Koreatown street below was busy with the ordinary Tuesday morning business of people going somewhere. A woman pushing a stroller, a delivery truck, double-parked, 2 men arguing cheerfully outside a restaurant about something I could not hear through the glass. Nora had spent 30 years living a life that had nothing to do with any of this. She had raised Claire, gone back to school at 42 to finish her degree, built a small bookkeeping practice out of a spare bedroom in Queens. She was meticulous and careful and honest in the specific way of someone who had grown up without much and understood the value of keeping her name clean. And while she was doing all of that, someone had picked her name up like a tool and used it to move $41 million through 3 bank accounts she did not know existed. My hands were clenched at my sides. I made myself open them. Identity theft, I said. Federal. 18 U.S.C. Section 1028. Marcus confirmed. Aggravated because it's committed in connection with another federal felony wire fraud. Mandatory minimum 2 years on top of whatever the underlying sentence is. He paused. But Raymond, Nora's exposure here is real. Until DOJ confirms she had no knowledge, her name is on those accounts. If this goes public before we establish her clean, she becomes a person of interest. Which is exactly what he wants, I said. He wants a reason to call me and say, sign something, stay quiet, or your ex-wife goes down with my son. Yes, Marcus said. That's what he's built here. I called Nora at 8 o'clock. She picked up on the second ring, and her voice had the careful brightness of someone who had been awake for a while and was working hard to sound like everything was fine. How's Claire this morning? She asked immediately. Stable, I said. Nora, I need you to listen to me carefully. Don't talk to any lawyers that Ethan or Senator Vance suggest to you. Don't sign anything they send you. Don't discuss Claire's case with anyone except me. A beat of silence. Then, Raymond, what is going on? I'll explain soon. Right now I need you to trust. Don't, she said, and her voice cracked at the edges, sharp and frightened and exhausted all at once. Don't tell me to trust you again without telling me something real. I am sitting in this hospital, watching my daughter breathe through a machine, and somebody is sending me text messages about her documents, and now you're calling me at 8 in the morning, telling me not to talk to lawyers. Her breath hitched. Tell me something real. I closed my eyes. She deserved that. She had always deserved more than I gave her. Your name is on some financial documents connected to Ethan's business, I said. Documents you didn't sign and didn't know about. It's not your fault and you are not in trouble, but I need time to establish that clearly before anyone starts asking questions. The silence that followed was different from before, longer, heavier. My name, she said. Yes. On his documents. Yes. I heard her exhale a long, unsteady breath that carried 3 days of fear and grief and sleeplessness all at once. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet and controlled in the way that comes after you have decided that falling apart is not an option right now. How long have you known? She asked. Since this morning, I said. And you're handling it. It was not a question. It was the particular tone of a woman who had spent 14 years being married to a man who handled things she was not allowed to know about, and who had made a separate peace with that fact a long time ago, even though it cost her something she never fully named. Yes, I said. Another pause. Then, fix it, Raymond. I will, I said. She hung up first. I stood in that Koreatown room with the phone in my hand and the sheet of paper with her name on it on the table, and the Tuesday morning street moving below, and I thought about the specific kind of anger that does not heat up but goes cold, the kind that settles into the chest like ballast and stays there heavy and permanent and useful. Ethan had used Nora the way he used everything as an instrument, as leverage, as something to be picked up and applied and put back down, He had made a mistake doing that, not a tactical mistake, a personal one. 4 rows from the bottom, I said to Marcus. He looked at the paper. Yes. Make sure every document we send to the FBI has a section dedicated specifically to establishing her non-involvement. Dated, sourced, airtight. Already started, Marcus said. I picked up the paper, folded it once, and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I went to the hospital to sit with my daughter, and on the way, I bought yellow flowers from the stand on Wilshire, and I carried them upstairs and set them next to the ones from yesterday that were already starting to open. The call came at 7:52 Wednesday morning, while I was in the hospital cafeteria with bad coffee and a view of the parking structure that I had memorized down to which level the SUV preferred. Unknown number, Los Angeles area code. Mr. Calloway, Dana Reyes said. I ran your name. I know you did, I said. A pause, not hesitation, more like recalibration. 26 years NYPD, retired 2019. You're real. Another pause shorter. Can we meet somewhere that isn't a parking lot? We met at a coffee shop on Fountain Avenue in East Hollywood, a small place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and enough ambient noise that a conversation at a corner table stayed private without effort. Dana was already there when I arrived, seated with her back to the wall, and her eyes on the door, which told me everything I needed to know about how she processed her environment. I sat down across from her. She had a cortado, and the 3 pages from my envelope laid flat on the table, annotated in pencil in a handwriting so small and precise it looked like it belonged to someone cataloging evidence, which I supposed was exactly what she had been doing. You read it, I said. 3 times, she said. The financial summary is thin. You're not giving me sources. Not yet, I said. I needed to know if you were the kind of detective who would still be sitting here on Wednesday after what happened to your case on Saturday. She looked at me steadily. Her jaw was set and her eyes were tired in the specific way of someone who had not slept well for several nights and had decided to be angry about it rather than depleted. My captain told me the Vance family wanted the case handled sensitively. That's a direct quote, sensitively. She said the word like it tasted bad. I have been a detective for 9 years, Mr. Calloway. I know what sensitive means when it comes from a captain who got a phone call from a city councilman 48 hours after I filed an intake report. What does it mean? I asked. It means make it go away, she said. And I don't make things go away. She picked up the top page of the summary and tapped it with one finger. Dr. Okafor's injury documentation is solid. The pattern is inconsistent with the stated mechanism. I knew that Friday night. What I didn't have was anything connecting the inconsistency to intent. She set the page down. Your summary suggests there's financial evidence. Connection to organized fraud. That's federal territory. Yes, I said. So why are you talking to me instead of walking straight to the FBI? I leaned forward slightly. Because the federal case needs the state assault charge to hold. If Ethan Vance is convicted of financial crimes, but Claire's case gets buried at the county level, he does reduce time in a federal facility and walks out in 8 years. The assault charge, what he did to my daughter, needs a detective who won't let it disappear. And it needs physical evidence that survived whatever he did to her phone. Dana was quiet for a moment. She turned her cortado in a slow circle on the table, a thinking gesture unconscious. Then she said, "There's something you need to know." Her voice had shifted, still professional, but with something underneath it that was personal in the way that things become personal when they have been sitting with you for a while. 3 years ago, she said, a woman named Melissa Hartley filed a report at Hollywood Division. 29-year-old event planner filed an assault complaint against Ethan Vance following an incident at a private event in Malibu. She watched my face. The complaint was detailed, specific, corroborated by physical evidence that Dr. Okafor's report would look very familiar alongside. My chest tightened. I kept my face where it needed to be. What happened to the complaint? I asked, though I already knew the shape of the answer. Melissa Hartley withdrew it 14 days after filing, Dana said. She retained a private attorney, not one she could have afforded on her own, and the complaint was formally withdrawn. She relocated to Portland, Oregon within the month. Dana picked up her cortado and held it without drinking. I was not the detective on that case. I found it in the system 2 years ago when I was running background on an unrelated matter, and the name Vance came up in a search. The file is closed, marked insufficient evidence. She set the cup down. It is not insufficient evidence. It is a paid settlement dressed up as a withdrawal. The anger that moved through me then was the cold kind, the kind I had learned to recognize and use rather than feel. I pressed it down into the place where I kept things that needed to wait. Claire isn't the first, I said. No, Dana said. She isn't. I looked at the annotated pages on the table between us. 3 years. Melissa Hartley had taken the money and moved to Portland and carried that withdrawal with her like a stone in her pocket. She had done it because she had no choice and no one to stand beside her, and no way to know that 3 years later, a woman named Claire would walk through a door that was open 2 inches and point a phone at a table. Is she willing to talk? I asked. I don't know yet, Dana said. I haven't contacted her. I wanted to understand what I was walking into before I asked someone to walk into it with me. She met my eyes directly. Mr. Calloway, I became a detective because files don't disappear on my watch. That's not a speech. It's just what's true. Her voice was flat and certain, the voice of someone stating a fact rather than making a promise. If you bring me something I can work with, I will work with it. I'll have something for you by end of week, I said. She nodded, gathered the 3 pages, folded them once, and put them in her jacket pocket. Then she stood, picked up her cortado, and finished it in one go like a woman with a schedule to keep. One more thing, she said, pausing at the edge of the table. Yes, the man who called my captain. Her eyes were level and direct. Robert Daly, he sits on the budget committee. He has influence over department funding. A beat. He also attended a fundraiser at the Vance estate in Bel Air 14 months ago. There are photographs. They are public record because the event was logged as a campaign finance disclosure. She looked at me. I'm telling you that because you seem like someone who finds things useful. She walked out. I sat with my cold coffee and looked at the 3 empty chairs around the table and thought about Melissa Hartley in Portland, with a stone in her pocket, and about Claire on the 4th floor of Cedars-Sinai, with machines doing her breathing, and about the specific arithmetic of a man who had done this before and been allowed to do it again because the right people made the right calls at the right time. Not this time. I pulled out the prepaid phone and called Marcus. It's find Melissa Hartley in Portland, I said. Current address, current employer, current phone. Don't contact her, just find her. And pulled the campaign finance records for a fundraiser at the Vance estate in Bel Air 14 months ago. Guest list. Give me 2 hours, Marcus said. You have one, I said, and ended the call. Outside on Fountain Avenue, a city bus rolled past, with an advertisement on its side for a personal injury law firm, a smiling attorney pointing at the camera above the words, "We fight for you." The morning light was the particular flat white of a Los Angeles September that had not decided yet whether to be hot or just warm. I left $4 on the table for a coffee I had not ordered and walked out into it. Senator Douglas Vance's district office in Sacramento occupied the 4th floor of a building on L Street with a view of the Capitol Dome and a receptionist who smiled with the practiced warmth of someone whose job required her to make everyone feel expected. I had driven up that morning 3 hours north on the 5, the Central Valley flat and brown on both sides, the kind of drive that gives you nothing to look at and plenty of time to think. The recording device was a small unit clipped to the inside of my jacket pocket. Voice activated, the kind that picks up conversation at conversational volume without requiring the speaker to be within arm's reach. I had carried one like it for 11 years in the field. California is a 2-party consent state under its own penal code, but federal law, 18 U.S.C., Section 2, 511, subsection 2, DI governs, when the purpose is to document and report federal criminal activity for federal prosecution. I was a party to this conversation. The purpose was federal criminal activity. Senator Vance kept me waiting 9 minutes long enough to be a message short enough to be deniable as coincidence. Then his assistant walked me back through a corridor hung with photographs of the senator, shaking hands with people who mattered, and into an office with dark wood and California state flag, and the particular stillness of a room that had absorbed 22 years of deals being made. He stood when I entered and crossed the room to shake my hand, and his grip was warm, and his eyes were concerned, and his voice carried exactly the right measure of solemnity. "Raymond," he said, "thank you for making the drive. I know this has been an incredibly difficult time. How is Claire?" "Stable," I said. "Thank you for asking." He gestured to the chair across from his desk and settled into his own, with the unhurried ease of a man in his natural habitat. He did not open with the subject. He asked about the drive, about where I was staying in Los Angeles, about whether the hospital staff had been attentive. He asked these questions with what appeared to be genuine interest, and probably was in the way that genuine interest and strategic patience can coexist in someone who has practiced both long enough. Then, after perhaps 4 minutes of this, he leaned forward slightly and folded his hands on the desk. "I want to be honest with you," he said, which is a sentence that in 26 years of undercover work, I had learned to treat the way you treat the click of a safety coming off. "Please," I said. "What happened to Claire is a tragedy. And I understand as a father, I understand the instinct to find someone to hold responsible, to make sense of something senseless." He paused, his expression carefully calibrated between empathy and gravity. "But I've been made aware that certain documents have come to light that involve names connected to our family, and I want you to understand that those documents are complicated. Context matters enormously in these situations." He looked at me steadily. "Nora's name appearing in certain financial records could, if taken out of context, if handled by people who don't understand the full picture, complicate things for everyone involved." He let that land. "I think we all want what's best for Claire's recovery," he continued. "A prolonged public dispute helps no one, least of all her. A man in your position should understand the value of keeping things simple." I looked at him across the desk, at the photographs behind him, at the California flag, at the hands folded with such deliberate calm. "I appreciate you being direct," I said. "I'm always direct," he said, which was the most indirect thing he had said in the entire conversation. "I'll think carefully about what you've said," I told him. He stood and shook my hand again and walked me to the door himself, which was a courtesy that cost him nothing, and communicated a great deal about how certain he was that the conversation had gone the way he intended. I drove back down the 5 with the recorder warm in my jacket pocket and called Marcus somewhere south of Stockton. "And got it," I said. "All of it. Every word." I watched the valley move past the windows, flat brown, enormous. He mentioned Nora by name, in the context of complications, in the context of keeping things simple. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's not a direct threat." "No," I said, "it's not. But stack it against the NDA, the text to Nora, the 2 men who've been sitting outside my motel for a week, and the phone call his chief of staff made to a city councilman the morning after Claire was admitted." I paused. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 1512, witness tampering does not require an explicit threat. It requires an attempt to influence, delay, or prevent testimony or cooperation in a federal proceeding. He just described Nora's involvement in federal documents as a complication that could be managed if I kept things simple. "In a recorded conversation," Marcus said. "In a recorded conversation," I confirmed. I drove the rest of the way to Los Angeles with the afternoon sun in my eyes and the recorder in my pocket and the feeling of something that had been moving in one direction for a long time, beginning very slowly to turn. Friday morning. Koreatown. The table between Marcus and me was covered in paper-printed summaries, financial flowcharts, time-stamped screenshots, a USB drive in a small evidence bag that Marcus had labeled in his precise handwriting. 8 days of work laid out in order the way you lay out a case before you hand it to someone else to carry. "Walk me through it one more time," I said. Marcus tapped each item as he spoke. Video evidence 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Claire's recording 2 identifiable subjects with prior federal interest. Financial analysis $340 million, 11. LLCs, 6 years, 3 states. Ownership chain, Pacific Meridian Logistics, traced through 4 layers to a management address in Senator Vance's zip code. Physical evidence, Long Beach container, ship 8 annual runs, uneconomical manifest cargo. This identity fraud documentation, Nora Calloway's SSN used to open 3 bank accounts without her knowledge or consent. Recorded conversation, Sacramento, 11 September. Senator Vance referencing Nora's name in the context of managing complications. He looked up. Witness tampering chain NDA text to Nora, the 2 men who've been outside your motel for 8 days, and the Sacramento recording. And Donna Reyes's documentation of Melissa Hartley's withdrawn complaint establishing pattern of behavior. He said it the way he said, everything flat, factual, without drama. but the weight of it sat on that table like something physical. "It's enough," I said. "It's more than enough," Marcus said. "The question is whether it gets buried." That was always the question. Evidence without witnesses gets lost. Evidence without the right door gets lost. I had spent 26 years watching good cases disappear into the wrong hands at the wrong moment, and I was not going to let that happen to this one. I sent the package at 9:47 Friday morning encrypted digital submission to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit at the Los Angeles Field Office and a parallel submission to IRS Criminal Investigation Division, Western Region. Anonymous, properly formatted with a cover document that organized the evidence into 8 numbered sections and cited the relevant federal statutes at the top of each one. I did it from a laptop Marcus had purchased in cash from a Best Buy in Burbank. The submission went through 3 routing steps before it reached the FBI server. When it was done, Marcus closed the laptop, and we sat there for a moment with the particular feeling of having released something that could not be taken back. "Now we wait," Marcus said. "Now we wait." I agreed. I drove to the hospital. Upstairs, Claire's numbers were holding the attending physician use the word stable again, and I had learned by now that stable was its own kind of progress when the alternative was the other word nobody said out loud. I sat beside her and read from a building code document I had printed at the motel's business center, California. Title 24 Energy Efficiency Standards, the most boring document the state had produced in recent memory, in the same flat, unhurried voice I had been using for 8 days. The afternoon passed. I bought coffee from the machine. I called Nora at 7, as I had every evening. I told her Claire was stable. Nora said she was taking Lily to the park tomorrow. I said that was good. We talked for 11 minutes about nothing that mattered and everything that did. Then I went back to Koreatown and waited. Sunday evening, 14 September. The prepaid phone rang. The voice on the other end identified itself with a phrase I recognized from 26 years ago, a piece of internal language from a joint task force operation in 2012 that no one outside that operation would know. It was the FBI's way of telling me the person calling was who they said they were without saying who they were. "We received your package," the voice said. A man mid-40s by sound, the flat professional register of someone who had made many calls like this one. "We've been sitting on 2 of the subjects in your submission for 4 years. We had the network mapped 3 layers deep. We didn't have the top." "You do now," I said. "We do now," he confirmed. A pause. "The financial documentation is clean. The recording from Sacramento is admissible under federal one-party consent rules. The identity fraud component gives us a separate charging track." Another pause longer. "Mr. Calloway, whatever you're planning to do in the next few weeks, make sure it holds up in a courtroom." "It will," I said. "Grand jury proceedings will begin within 2 to 3 weeks, he said. "Once that starts, things move fast. People get nervous. Nervous people do things that create problems." "I understand," I said. He ended the call. I sat in the Koreatown motel room with the prepaid phone in my hand and looked at that curtain with the parking lot light bleeding through the edges and thought about 4 years. 4 years of watching Victor Crane move money and not being able to reach the hand directing him. 4 years of a case file that had everything except the ceiling. Claire had found the ceiling in 4 minutes and 12 seconds through a door open 2 inches. I set the phone on the nightstand, picked up the quarterly report I had been pretending to read for client back in Queens, opened it to page 1. Then I drove to the hospital and read it out loud to my daughter until visiting hours ended, and on the way out, I nodded to the night nurse Baptiste, who had stopped questioning why a man read building codes and quarterly reports to a woman who could not hear them, and I walked to my car in the parking structure and noticed that the SUV was still there, same spot and same 2 men, and I felt something settle in my chest that was not quite relief, but was adjacent to it. The package was in. The grand jury was coming. 2 to 3 weeks. I could be patient for 2 to 3 weeks. I had been patient for 8 days already, and patience in my experience is not the absence of action. It is the discipline of knowing which action to take and exactly when to take it. I started the car and drove back to Koreatown through the Sunday night Los Angeles traffic, and I bought a sandwich from a place on Vermont that was still open, and I ate it in the parking lot of the motel, and I watched the SUV park 50 feet away, and I thought about what came next. I knew something was going to happen Monday night before it happened. The SUV had been running a consistent pattern for 8 days. Same intervals, same rotation, same reporting cadence that I had mapped by watching the driver's side window and the timestamps on what Marcus could pull from their communication logs. Monday afternoon, the pattern changed. The intervals shortened. The two men stopped rotating and stayed in the vehicle together. At 3 in the afternoon, one of them made a phone call that lasted 11 minutes, which was 9 minutes longer than any call they had made since Saturday. Someone had given them new instructions. I called Marcus at 4. "Tonight," I said. "How sure?" "Sure enough, get Dana." I left the hospital at 10 o'clock, the same way I had left every night for 8 days. Main entrance turn, left on San Vicente, south on Fairfax, east on Olympic, toward Koreatown. The SUV picked me up on San Vicente 2 cars back, exactly where it always was. The difference tonight was that Marcus was 4 cars behind the SUV, and Dana Reyes was in an unmarked Impala on the cross street at Fairfax and Olympic engine running, watching the intersection on a live feed from the small camera Marcus had attached to the underside of my rental car's rear bumper 48 hours ago. They moved at the intersection of Olympic and Normandy a block and a half from the motel, close enough that they had probably timed it to give me nowhere to go. The SUV accelerated and cut diagonally across the lane in front of me, and a second vehicle, a gray sedan I had not identified yet, which told me they had added a car, came up fast on my left and stopped parallel to mine. The man who got out of the passenger side of the SUV was large mid-40s, wearing a jacket that did not quite conceal the outline of the weapon holstered on his right hip. He walked to my driver's side window with the unhurried confidence of someone who had done this before and expected it to go a certain way. I rolled down the window. "Mr. Calloway," he said, not a question. "We need the tablet." "I don't have a tablet," I said. "Mr. Calloway." His voice dropped half a register, the specific tone of a man moving from the polite version of a threat to the less polite one. "This doesn't have to be complicated." Behind him, 40 feet back, I could see Marcus's rental car idling at the curb, with its hazards on, looking like a man who had pulled over to check his phone. And in my side mirror, the white headlights of Dana's Impala had turned onto Normandy and were moving toward us at a pace that was not slow. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't." Dana's light bar came on red and blue, strobing across the intersection. At the same moment she hit the siren, once a single sharp burst that bounced off the buildings on both sides of Normandy and said very clearly that whatever was happening here was now a different kind of situation. The large man's head turned. That was his mistake, the half-second of distraction that comes when your plan stops working and your brain has to catch up. By the time he looked back at my window, I had already opened the door and stepped out, and I was standing at full height, with my hands visible at my sides, and Dana was out of her vehicle with her badge up, moving fast. "LAPD, don't move, hands where I can see them." She had back up 2 units that had been staged a block north and came around the corner 30 seconds after her light bar went on, which meant she had arranged this more carefully than I had asked her to. That told me something about Dana Reyes that I filed away for later. The large man from the SUV put his hands up. The second man from the gray sedan made a decision that did not go well for him. He tried to get back in the vehicle, which Dana's backup unit blocked with practiced efficiency before he had the door fully open. Both men were in zip ties within 4 minutes. Both vehicles were secured. Both cell phones were bagged as evidence, which was the part that mattered most. I stood on the sidewalk on Normandy Avenue at 10:23 at night, watching Dana direct her backup units with the quiet authority of someone who had been building toward this moment for 11 days, without telling me that was what she was doing. The Korean barbecue place across the street was still open. 2 men at a window table had stopped eating and were watching the police lights. Marcus pulled up beside me. "The gray sedan was a rental," he said. "I ran the plate while they were moving. It's registered to a shell company that traces back to Arden Security Solutions." "Same firm?" I said. "Same firm, which means the same client." He looked at the 2 men now sitting on the curb with their hands secured behind them. "Their phones are going to be interesting." He was right about that. Marcus spent 2 hours with Dana's digital forensics contact that night, and what came off those phones was not complicated. Text messages, 6 of them between the large man, and a contact saved as TG. Instructions to recover a tablet from Raymond Calloway using whatever means necessary, a follow-up message confirming the approach plan, and a final message sent at 9:47 that evening that said he leaves the hospital at 10. Don't come back without it. TG Thomas Greer, the man who had sat across from me in the Cedar Sinai waiting room with his leather portfolio and his 3 office addresses, and his absolute certainty that he had handled the situation, had just sent 6 text messages on an unencrypted phone ordering 2 men to take property from a private citizen by force. Dana called me at 1 in the morning from the division. "Greer's name is on 3 of the messages directly," she said. Her voice had the particular flat energy of someone running on adrenaline and bad coffee. "We have him on witness intimidation and conspiracy to commit robbery. He's going to need a lawyer significantly better than himself." "Will he flip?" I asked. A pause. "In my experience," she said, "men like Greer flip the moment they understand that loyalty to a client is not a defense to a felony. Give him 48 hours with a federal hold over his head, and he'll be very motivated to share what he knows." "Good," I said. I hung up and sat in the Koreatown motel room and looked at the ceiling for a while. 8 days of being the most boring man in Los Angeles. 8 days of flowers and cafeteria sandwiches and quarterly reports read aloud to someone who could not hear them. 8 days of letting the SUV sit outside and report back that everything was normal. And now Thomas Greer, the man who had handed me an NDA with a hole in it big enough to drive a federal investigation through, had used an unencrypted phone to order 2 men to take evidence from a witness in a case connected to a sitting state senator. He had not handled the situation at all. He had handed me the situation. Gift-wrapped with a chain of custody I had not even had to build myself. I set the prepaid phone on the nightstand. I thought about calling Nora, but it was 1 in the morning and she would be asleep with Lily, and what I had to tell her could wait until tomorrow, when I could say it calmly and completely and without the particular rawness that comes from standing on a sidewalk at 10:23 at night, watching something you have been building for 8 days finally irrevocably begin. I turned off the light. For the first time since September 5th, the parking lot outside my window was empty. Marcus called at 5:40 Tuesday morning. "It's done," he said. "Both of them." I sat up in the motel bed. "Both? Check your phone." He had sent 2 photographs. The first was taken from a distance in low light, the front gate of the Vance estate in Bel Air, wrought iron, the security camera mounted on the left post, currently cycling through its scheduled maintenance window, according to a permit filed 6 weeks ago with the Los Angeles County Department of Building and Safety. Public record. The maintenance ran from 4 to 6 in the morning, Tuesday through Thursday, while the contractor completed the upgrade. In the photograph, a plain white envelope was visible on the ground just inside the gate. On the outside of the envelope, 4 words written in block letters. "You touched the wrong family." The second photograph stopped me. Ethan Vance was sitting at the base of the large oak tree in the motor court of his own estate, the one I had seen through the gate on the morning I walked the property's perimeter a week ago. He was sitting with his back against the trunk and his arms pulled behind him, not bound with anything that would leave marks, just held in the specific way that tells a person they are not going anywhere without making a decision about it. His wrists were zip-tied loosely in front of him, tight enough to hold, not tight enough to mark. He was wearing a t-shirt and pajama pants. His feet were bare. He was looking at something on the ground in front of him. The envelope. I stared at that photograph for a long time. Marcus had not told me he was going to do this. I had told him I wanted the envelope delivered. He had decided on his own that the envelope alone was not enough, that a man like Ethan Vance, who had spent his entire life understanding consequences only when they were placed directly in front of him and made impossible to ignore, needed to understand something first. He needed to understand that the people who had built the case against him could reach him anywhere, in his own motor court, at 4 in the morning, in his pajamas. I called Marcus back. "How long?" I asked. 40 minutes, he said. Start to finish. 2 of mine, nobody from the estate detail saw anything. He was out walking. He does that sometimes before dawn. The night staff know it and don't follow him on the grounds. A pause. He was not hurt, Raymond. Not one mark. They held him there, left the envelope, and walked out the same way they came in. And the envelope. He read it while he was sitting there, Marcus said. That was the point. He had nowhere to go and nothing to do but read it. I thought about that. Ethan Vance sitting against the trunk of a tree in his own motor court in the dark before sunrise, reading a photograph of his own face in a room he thought no one had seen, with 4 words on the back that he could not argue with, and could not buy his way out of, and could not call his lawyer about at 4 in the morning. The camera, I asked. Maintenance window, Marcus said. 40 minutes of gap in the exterior coverage. Everything inside the gate was dark. He paused. There is nothing on any recording that shows anything except two workers in contractor gear entering and leaving through the service access point during a scheduled maintenance window. Another pause. Which is in the permit? I got dressed and drove to the hospital. Senator Douglas Vance called me at 6:13 in the morning from his personal cell phone. I was sitting in the hospital parking structure with the engine running and a gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder, and when the prepaid phone rang and I saw the California area code I knew before, I answered. A man with 22 years in the California State Senate calling a retired insurance consultant from Queens on his personal cell phone at 6 in the morning. The scaffolding he had spent 2 decades constructing was making sounds he had never heard it make before, and the fear had gotten in ahead of the training. "Who are you?" Senator Vance said. Not Raymond, not the warm practice greeting from the L Street office. Just 3 words stripped of everything that had always made him formidable. I looked through the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking structure and thought about Claire upstairs on the 4th floor, with her machines and her numbers and the yellow flowers that had been fully open for 3 days now. "You don't need to know who I am, Senator," I said. My voice came out flat, and even the way it had come out in a great many rooms over a great many years. "You only need to know what your son did." A silence on his end, not the calculated silence of a man selecting his words with care, but the silence of a man whose words had simply stopped arriving. "Whatever you think you have," he started. "I know what I have," I said. "So do the people I sent it to." Another silence, longer than the first. "Raymond." "Don't call this number again," I said. I ended the call, set the phone on the passenger seat, picked up the coffee, cold tasted like the parking structure smelled, and sat there while the Los Angeles morning came together around me. First cars. A delivery truck on the level below, the flat early light coming in sideways through the structure's open sides. Senator Douglas Vance had called me from his personal cell phone. The phone registered in his name, carrying his personal number, the one that any first-year federal prosecutor could subpoena, in a 2-page filing cross-referenced against the Sacramento recording and Greer's text messages and an NDA that did not say what it was supposed to say. He had done it because he was afraid, and afraid men with personal cell phones make the kind of decisions that end up as Exhibit A. I thought about Ethan sitting against that oak tree at 4 in the morning, reading a photograph in the dark. I thought about what it must have felt like to understand in that motor court in those pajamas, with his arms held behind him, and nobody coming, that the man his family had dismissed as a retired, nobody from Queens, had been inside his house for 3 weeks, had wired it, had learned its rhythms, had walked its perimeter, had known about the oak tree and the pre-dawn walks and the maintenance window and the 40-minute gap in the camera coverage, had been in every sense that mattered the most dangerous person on that property, not because he could hurt anyone, because he already had everything he needed. I got out of the car, bought yellow flowers from the corner stand on Wilshire, same as every morning Claire's color since she was 7, and carried them upstairs and set them next to the ones from yesterday in the thin vase the nurses had stopped asking me about. I sat down beside my daughter, opened the quarterly report to where I had left off. And outside in the city, the pieces I had put in motion kept moving. They knew where to go. The next 3 weeks were the quietest of the whole thing, which is not the same as saying nothing happened. What happened was that the Vance family began to come apart in the specific way that organizations come apart, when the people inside them stop trusting each other and start protecting themselves. I watched it from a distance through Marcus, through Dana, through the particular silence of a parking lot that no longer had a black SUV in it. Marcus tracked the movement through financial channels. In the week after the envelope, Vance Capital began shifting documents digitally through a series of transfers that were probably intended to look like routine data management, and instead looked exactly like what they were, because the FBI had been watching those servers since the grand jury convened. Every file that moved was logged. Every transfer was time-stamped. Every attempt to clean the records created a new record of the cleaning. "They're panicking," Marcus told me on a Wednesday in late September, sitting in the Koreatown room with his laptop and a coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. "Panicking people think they're erasing things. They're actually writing a second set of books." "Let them write," I said. Dana filed her internal affairs complaint against Captain Hollander the 3rd week of September, a formal report documenting the phone call from Robert Daly, the timeline of the case reclassification, and her own assessment that the reclassification had no investigative basis. She filed it herself, without telling me she was going to, which I found out when she called to let me know it was done. "You didn't have to do that," I told her. "Yes, I did," she said, and her voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had thought about it carefully and arrived at a place beyond argument. "Hollander told me to handle it sensitively. I handled it, just not the way he meant. The internal affairs investigation opened within 48 hours. Daly's name was in the file. The campaign finance records Dana had mentioned the fundraiser at the Vance estate. The guest list public record went into the IA file as supporting context. Melissa Hartley called Dana on the 1st of October. Dana told me about it the same evening, standing in the hospital corridor outside Claire's room, while I held a cup of coffee I had forgotten to drink. She said she had been waiting, Dana told me. Her voice was careful in the way it gets when the information is personal, and she is trying to deliver it accurately. Not for this specifically, just waiting. She said she knew it would happen again. She said that kind of man doesn't stop because you go away. He stops because someone makes him stop. Dana paused. She's willing to testify. She said she's been willing for 3 years. She just needed someone to ask. My throat tightened. I looked at the door of Claire's room, the small window, the pale light inside the shape of my daughter, visible through the glass. 3 years. Melissa Hartley had carried a withdrawn complaint from Hollywood to Portland and waited 3 years for someone to ask the right way. And my daughter had walked through a door open 2 inches and given someone the reason to ask. "Tell her thank you," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I will," Dana said. The first intermediary contacted the FBI on the 6th of October. Marcus called me. When it happened, I was in the cafeteria, same table I had been using for a month, same bad coffee, and he said simply, "One of the LLC managers just walked into the field office on Wilshire, brought a lawyer, asking about cooperation terms." I set down the coffee. "Which one?" "The Delaware entity, the one with the Long Beach connection." A pause. "Raymond, when the first one goes, the rest follow. They always do. Nobody wants to be the last one holding when the music stops." He was right. Over the following 10 days, 2 more intermediaries made contact with the FBI through their attorneys. Each one arrived with documents. Each one arrived with information the FBI did not yet have. Each one arrived because the alternative waiting, while the people above them scrambled and the evidence piled up and the grand jury kept meeting, was worse than the conversation they were trying to avoid. The machine was running on its own now. I spent those weeks the way I had spent every week since September 5th, mornings at the hospital, evenings at the hospital, the hours between doing the work that still needed doing. I bought yellow flowers every morning from the corner stand. I read quarterly reports and building codes and California Title 24 out loud to a woman who could not hear me in the same flat, unhurried voice, because it was the only thing I knew how to give her that had any chance of reaching wherever she was. On the 17th of October, a Friday, 5 weeks and 5 days since the night everything changed, Dr. Okafor stopped me in the hallway outside Claire's room. She had the expression she used when she had something to say that was not bad news, but was not yet good news either. The careful, precise expression of a doctor who had learned that hope is a tool that has to be handled correctly, or it does more damage than the disease. Her responses to external stimuli have increased significantly over the past 72 hours, Dr. Okafor said. She is tracking faces through the window. Her pressure readings have been stable for 9 consecutive days. She paused. "I am not telling you she is going to wake up tomorrow. I am telling you that the numbers are moving in a direction I did not expect them to move this quickly." I stood in that hallway and felt something shift in my chest. Not the cold that had lived there since September 5th, but something warmer and more frightening than the cold, because hope is always more frightening than the alternative when you have been afraid for long enough. "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means keep coming," she said. "Keep doing whatever you're doing in there. Keep talking to her." She looked at me steadily. "I have seen families give up on a patient, and I have seen families refuse to give up. The patients who have someone in that room every single day reading to them, talking to them, being present, their outcomes are statistically different. I cannot explain the mechanism. I am simply telling you what the data shows." She walked back toward the nursing station. I stood in the hallway for a moment, then I went back into the room, sat down beside Claire, and opened the quarterly report to page 1. That same evening on the television in the cafeteria, where I went to get coffee at 7, a news segment led with a brief item, Vance Capital offices in downtown Los Angeles had received a visit from federal investigators. The segment lasted 40 seconds. A spokesman for the company said the company was cooperating fully with all inquiries. The anchor moved on to the next story. Marcus called while I was watching. Grand jury is active, he said. The U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed proceedings are underway. No timeline on indictment, but they're moving. I looked at the television, where the anchor was now talking about a water shortage in the Central Valley. Marcus? I said. Yeah. Claire's responding to stimuli. Dr. Okafor says her numbers are moving. A silence. Not the silence of a man with nothing to say. The silence of a man taking a moment to feel something he had been disciplined enough not to feel until now. Good, Marcus said. His voice was quieter than usual. That's good, Raymond. I finished my coffee, went back upstairs, sat beside Claire, and read to her until the nurse came to tell me visiting hours were over, and for the first time in 37 days, I drove back to the Koreatown motel without the specific weight in my chest that had been there every night since September 5th. It was still there, but it was lighter. I was in the hospital cafeteria at 8:47 on Tuesday morning, October 21st, when Marcus called and said, "Turn on the news." The television mounted on the cafeteria wall was tuned to a local Los Angeles channel showing a traffic report. I asked the woman behind the counter if she could change it. She found a news channel. I stood at the end of the counter with my coffee and watched. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read FBI raids, Vance Capital offices downtown, LA. The footage showed the building on South Figueroa, a glass tower, 32 floors. The kind of building that looks like it was designed to project permanence, with 3 black FBI vehicles pulled up to the main entrance, and agents in blue windbreakers moving through the lobby. A reporter stood on the sidewalk with the building behind her, speaking quickly into a microphone, and I turned up the volume on my phone and held it near the TV speaker. She said the words federal search warrant. She said financial crimes investigation. She said the company had not yet issued a statement. I drank my coffee and watched the footage loop. At 9:20, Marcus called again. Long Beach, he said. Pacific Meridian Logistics. The ship is being held at berth. IRS criminal investigation is on the dock. A pause. The Cayman accounts are frozen. DOJ filing came through this morning, asset freeze across all 11 LLCs. 11 companies, $340 million, 6 years. I set the coffee down and walked upstairs to the 4th floor. Claire's room was the same as it had been every morning for 46 days. The machines, the numbers, the flowers, and the thin vase that I had replaced yesterday with fresh ones because the old ones had finally gone. I sat down beside her and looked at her face and thought about a 23-story glass building on South Figueroa with federal agents in the lobby and 340 million reasons why they were there. At 11 o'clock, Thomas Greer's cooperation agreement became public record. Marcus sent me the filing summary. Greer had given the U.S. Attorney's Office 4 days of testimony over the previous 2 weeks, testimony that the filing described as substantial and corroborated. Among the things he had provided documentation, showing Senator Douglas Vance had personally directed the use of Nora Calloway's personal information to establish the 3 Delaware LLCs, not Ethan, the senator. The instruction had come from the top in writing in an internal communication that Greer had retained the kind of document that a careful lawyer keeps, because careful lawyers understand that loyalty has a shelf life and preparation does not. Senator Vance had used Nora's name as a weapon, and the man he had trusted to hold that weapon had handed it to the federal government in exchange for a reduced charge and the ability to keep his law license. Marcus called at noon. His voice was quieter than usual, the particular quiet of someone delivering news they have been carrying for a while. DOJ issued a formal statement this morning, he said. Nora Calloway has been confirmed as a non-involved party. Her name will be removed from all investigative filings. No charges, no further inquiry. I was sitting beside Claire when he told me. I had the quarterly report open on my knee, but I had stopped reading 3 pages ago and was just sitting the way you sit when you have been moving fast for a long time, and the movement has finally slowed enough to let you feel the stillness. Thank you, Marcus, I said. Don't thank me, he said. She didn't do anything. The paperwork just needed to catch up to that fact. At 2 in the afternoon, Victor Crane was arrested at LAX. He had a one-way ticket to Singapore on a flight that departed at 4:15. Federal agents met him at the gate. The arrest took 40 seconds according to the agent who filed the report, which Marcus obtained through a contact the following day. Crane did not resist. He sat down in the chair they indicated and put his hands on his knees and waited, which was the behavior of a man who had known this was coming and had simply been hoping he could outrun the timing. He had not outrun the timing. Dale Morrow surrendered to the FBI field office in Chicago 2 days later on Thursday the 23rd, with his attorney beside him and a cooperation proffer already prepared. The agent who took his surrender described him as cooperative and detailed, which in federal language means he had a great deal to say and had organized it carefully before walking through the door. Senator Douglas Vance's resignation letter was released at 9 in the morning on Thursday 23rd of October on official California State Senate letterhead. It was 4 sentences long. It cited personal and family reasons. It did not mention the federal investigation, the grand jury, the cooperation agreement of his family's former attorney, or the $340 million that had moved through 11 companies over 6 years. It thanked the people of California for the honor of serving them. 22 years, 4 sentences. I read it on my phone while sitting in the cafeteria and felt nothing in particular, which was its own kind of answer about what I had come here to do and what I had not. Marcus called at noon on Thursday. "Nora's clear," he said, which was the second time he had said it because it was the kind of thing that deserved saying more than once. "I know," I said. "I'm going to call her tonight." "How is she holding up?" "Better than she lets on," I said. "Same as always." That evening, Thursday the 23rd, 48 days since September 5th, I was sitting beside Claire in the particular late afternoon light that came through her window when the sun dropped below the building across the street and turned everything in the room a specific shade of amber that I had come to think of as hers, as belonging to this room and this time and this particular version of waiting when Dr. Okafor came in. She did not say anything immediately. She checked the monitors, made a notation on the tablet she carried, and looked at Claire for a long moment with the expression of a woman who had been doing this for 12 years and still found the work surprising sometimes. Then she looked at me. "Her responsiveness scores have increased 22% over the past week," she said. "The intracranial pressure has been within normal range for 11 consecutive days. The edema has resolved almost entirely." She paused. "Mr. Calloway, I want to be careful about what I say here, because I have seen patients plateau at this stage, and I do not want to create an expectation that the data cannot yet support." Another pause. "But if you ask me today whether I believe your daughter is going to wake up, I would tell you that I believe she is going to wake up." My jaw tightened. My eyes burned. I pressed my hands flat on my knees and breathed through it slowly the way I had breathed through a great many things in the past 48 days, and I did not say anything for a moment because there was nothing to say that would have been adequate to what I was feeling. "When?" I asked finally. "I don't know," she said. "It could be days. It could be longer. The brain works on its own schedule." She set the tablet under her arm. "Keep doing what you're doing. Keep reading to her. Keep coming." She left. I sat in the amber light with my quarterly report closed on my knee and my daughter's hand under mine, her fingers slightly warmer than they had been yesterday. Or maybe I was imagining that maybe warmth was something I was projecting onto data that did not yet support it, and I thought about what Dr. Okafor had said. She is going to wake up. I picked up the quarterly report, opened it to page 1 because I had been starting from the beginning every night for 48 days. Same page, same voice, the same flat and unhurried cadence that she had known her whole life, the one that reached her even now, even here. I cleared my throat, and I read. They brought Ethan out at 6:31 in the morning. I was parked half a block from the Bel Air gate engine, off hands in my lap, watching through the windshield. I had not planned to come, but some things you need to see with your own eyes, not read about afterward in a filing summary. Ethan Vance in handcuffs looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just diminished in the way that happens when the scaffolding around a person collapses. The estate, the security detail, the senator father, the press shirts, and the motor court, and the $6 million assessed value, all of it gone. And what was left underneath was a 36-year-old man in a gray t-shirt, walking toward a federal vehicle with his hands behind his back. Dana was at the gate. She saw me and gave a single nod. Ethan saw me too. He stopped just a step's worth and looked at me with the expression of a man whose understanding of a situation is rearranging itself in real time and he does not like where the pieces are landing. I reached into my jacket and took out the badge. NYPD. Retired. I held it up 3 seconds and put it back. His jaw went tight. His voice came out stripped of everything that had always been his instrument, the warmth, the confidence, the careful calibration of a man who had never in his life been on the losing side of a room. "You were undercover this whole time," he said. I looked at him. I thought about Claire at the bottom of a staircase. I thought about a phone call to 911 and 2 words she fell. I thought about Nora's name on 3 pieces of paper she would never have signed and an 8-year-old girl with her shoes on the wrong feet, standing in a hospital waiting room at 1 in the morning, holding a tablet out with both hands. "No," I said. "I was just her father. They put him in the vehicle. I watched the convoy move through the gate and disappear. Then I drove to the hospital, bought yellow flowers from the corner stand on Wilshire. The man had long since stopped asking what the occasion was and took them upstairs to the 4th floor. I set the flowers in the vase beside the ones from yesterday, opened the quarterly report to page 1, read in my flat, unhurried voice the voice Claire had fallen asleep to at 9 years old on the floor of my Queens apartment with a tape recorder in pieces between us. I read for 20 minutes. Then something stopped me. I had learned in 49 days to read the room the way I had always read rooms, the numbers, the rhythms, the specific character of each line on each monitor. Something had shifted. I could not have named it before I saw it. Claire's fingers moved. Her right hand on the blanket, the fingers curled. Uncurled were still. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my back teeth. I did not breathe. I leaned forward. Her fingers moved again. "Claire," I said. The word came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Hey, I'm right here." Her eyes opened slowly, the way eyes open when the person behind them is working very hard at something that used to be automatic. She looked at the ceiling, then the window, then at the angle that cost the most effort at me. Recognition came back in pieces. Her lips moved without sound, then moved again. "Did Lily give you the tablet?" Her voice was cracked and dry, and the best thing I had heard in 58 years. My throat closed completely. I had to look at the ceiling for a moment and breathe through my nose before I could answer. "She did," I said. Claire's eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, they had settled the settling of a person who has been holding one fear for a very long time and has just been told she can put it down. "Good girl," she whispered. Then, "What did you do, Dad?" I took her hand in both of mine, carefully, the way you hold something you came very close to losing. "I did what fathers do," I said. The door opened. Small feet on linoleum, quick and certain, the footsteps of someone who had been waiting long enough. Lily came around the end of the bed and stopped when she saw her mother's open eyes. Her hands went to her mouth. Her eyes filled and spilled before she could do anything about it. Then she climbed up carefully the way an 8-year-old climbs when she is trying very hard to be gentle, and lay down beside Claire with her head on her mother's shoulder. "Hi, Mommy," she said, her voice muffled by tears and fabric. Claire's arm came up slowly and settled around her daughter. "Hi, baby." Nora came in behind Lily. She stopped in the doorway and made a sound I will not try to describe, the sound of a specific kind of pain ending. She crossed the room and pressed Claire's free hand against her face, and her shoulders shook with something she did not try to control. I stood up, walked to the window, pressed one hand flat against the glass, and felt the cold of it. Behind me were Lily's voice and Nora crying, and Claire saying something low and slow that was meant for them, not for me. That was exactly right. I had spent 26 years being very good at disappearing, at leaving rooms so cleanly they did not know they had been changed. There are rooms you walk into and you do not leave. The work is staying. Claire said my name. I turned around. She was looking at me from the bed, Lily curled at her side, Nora holding her hand, trying to smile, not quite managing it yet, but the intention unmistakable. "Thank you," she said. "You did the hard part," I told her. She shook her head, small and slow and definite. "You stayed," she said. I pulled the chair back to the bedside and sat down, and I stayed. People ask me what I learned from all of this. I learned that family betrayal does not always arrive with a warning. Sometimes it walks through your front door in a pressed shirt and shakes your hand like a gentleman. I spent 26 years protecting strangers and told myself that was enough. It was not. Do not make my mistake. Do not wait until everything is broken before you show up. Show up now, when it is quiet, when nothing is burning, when the people you love still have time to feel it. I believe God places the right people in the right rooms at the right moment. An 8-year-old girl, with her shoes on the wrong feet, saved everything that night. That was not luck. That was grace. Every family story has a version of this underneath it. Someone who stayed when staying was the hardest thing. Every family betrayal leaves a trail. Every family story eventually finds its way back to the truth. If Raymond's story reached you today, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done differently. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe quiet justice is still justice, subscribe and stay with us. More stories are coming. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. It means everything. Some stories on this channel contain fictional elements created purely for storytelling and educational purposes. If this content is not right for you, we completely respect that. Feel free to explore what fits you best.